Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to start. I know people are still coming in. This is called for 11:45, but Senator Lankford has to leave and go off campus, so we want to get going. And we'll do the other intro remarks after the senator speaks. This is being recorded, and there is press in the room. Senator Lankford has been an incredible friend to the Jewish community. He is the co-founder and the co-chair of the Senate Bipartisan Task Force for Combating Anti-Semitism. And he's also a sponsor for the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act and has sponsored it in every Congress that it's been introduced. He has spoken numerous times on the Senate floor about the rise of anti-Semitism and the threats to Jewish students on campus and the needs for federal enforcement. We are so thankful to have you here and for everything you do, and also for your great staff who helped us get this room and organize this event. So, Senator.
It's an honor to be able to be here and to be able to help pull all this event together and the conversation together. Thanks for being here, and for the other folks that are joining, the folks that are joining online, and the folks that are joining in and out from the press. Thanks for being here and continuing to be able to have this type of conversation. Let me say first to all of you that are advocates in this area about anti-Semitism, do not grow weary in doing what is good. Keep going. There is, as I talk to several friends and allies in this area, there's a weirdness like, I'm tired of having to talk about this, and it feels like we're getting behind. We've got all these statements from Tucker Carlson and all these other folks online and podcasters and the crazy things that are online, and you feel like I'm losing ground. Do not grow weary in doing what's good. It is our turn. It's our generation to continue to be able to speak out for this and to make sure that we're making it exceptionally clear what the standards are, not only for America and for Americans and for international freedom for all faiths, but it is, quite frankly, to continue to be able to articulate the most basic human dignity and values. So keep going. Don't lose heart in the middle of all this, because we are making progress, because we're speaking to another generation that is hearing it for the first time on it, and we're reminding other people of the values of who we are. Second thing on this is, there's a rise of a conversation about the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition, the IHRA definition, to say, is this the right way to go? Or maybe we do a different definition, or maybe we redefine, or maybe we tweak out in some other ways. All that's fair dialogue on it, but let me just say where I come from on it. We have multiple nations all over the world. We have almost every state in America. We have British football teams that have recognized the IHRA definition. This is a growing consensus that is out there. It is much easier to be able to continue to be able to push that rock and to be able to gain momentum than it is to start all over again with a pebble and to say, let's start with something new. So I'm a big advocate for the IHRA definition and the examples that are there to be able to say, if we're going to make this clear, let's make it very clear. This doesn't inhibit the speech of anyone. As Americans, we have protected the right of anyone to say any dumb thing that they want to say. But we also want to make it clear what you are saying and what that really means, and to be able to articulate it not only for the State Department, which has had this as a recognized definition now for 30 years, but to say not just State Department, but Department of Education, for FBI, for all of our different entities, that we all understand across the executive branch and across all agencies, this is what it looks like to be able to speak something that's anti-Semitic, and then to be able to continue to pass that on. My state has recognized the IHRA definition. I think it's time the nation does as well, across all agencies and entities. And for all of us that have little differences of opinion, saying, I wish we would tweak it one way or the other, believe me, I serve in the Senate. We have those conversations every day. I wish we would have tweaked it one way or the other on it. We can add to it. We can expand beyond it. But in a personal belief, let's have that as a baseline. And to say, this is a global baseline. Let's now grow beyond that, but not have to reestablish a new floor. That's a pretty good floor for us to be able to have, and then to be able to start from there. That helps us all. One last comment, then I'm going to move on to the great panelists. Gosh, I'm glad y'all are here. Y'all are all very busy people. Thanks for being here and being a part of this dialogue. My other quick statement is, what is happening online right now and what is being repeated and the speed of it being repeated and abused is the first time in the history of the world that this amount of hatred has moved that fast, that quickly, with that much spin. It will only accelerate with the war with Iran right now. They have been the source of a lot of this anti-Semitism in so many ways, and I'm trying to dial things up through social media. But it is an area that we need to continue to discuss of how we're going to live and speak in the world of social media, and what we can do to be able to speak out for what's true and right and good. We have a lot to learn still on a tool that's not that many decades old and that is rapidly changing every few months now. But in the middle of all that, it is right for us to be able to protect the rights of all individuals to speak, but to also be able to call out what speech really looks like and to be able to find ways to be able to work with companies and entities to say, what are we going to do about the next generation that is 12 years old that's asking a box how to be able to define anti-Semitism and what things look like, and is the problem the Jews, and what is that box going to repeat back to them? That's entirely appropriate to be able to have those dialogues with technology companies, and I hope and look forward to those conversations to be able to make sure that we're protecting the rights of all people to be able to live free. So thank you for pulling things together in the work that you're doing. Our team will continue to be able to provide places to be able to have this type of dialogue, and we'll continue to be able to encourage the type of dialogue that I'm sure you will have today. So bless y'all, and thank you for the conversation today.
Thank you so much, Senator. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Karen Pakin-Baral. I'm the Chief Policy Officer at the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law, and I really want to welcome all of you for being here on this briefing on the IHRA definition, why it matters, how it works, where it makes a difference, and you're going to learn a lot about that today from our panelists. We're especially grateful to our outstanding partner organizations who helped make today possible: the American Jewish Committee, Anti-Defamation League, the Christians United for Israel, the Conference of Presidents of Major Jewish American Organizations, Hadassah, the Women's Zionist Organization of America, the Jewish Federations of North America, and the Orthodox Union. Thank you for your partnership and for the important work each of you are all doing in combating anti-Semitism. I also want to recognize some staff from the Louis D. Brandeis Center who worked very hard on this event and putting it together. My great colleague, Leo Myers, the Director of Policy and Government Affairs. Rachel Rowan, who is maybe outside in the hallway, is our Director of Events, and Emma Innig, who is our Director of Policy and Education. We have a great team, and I hope that most of you will get to work with them and meet with them if you haven't already. We are also, Congresswoman Gillum is supposed to be arriving any minute, but we're gonna, you know how things go, when they come in, we'll stop, we'll pause, and let her speak. And then before that, we're gonna start the program, and I want to introduce Ken, but give me 1 second, because I have his right here.
Okay, needs no introduction.
You know, when you introduce your boss, you got to read the bio. So the Honorable Ken Marcus, internationally recognized as an expert in civil and human rights, and as a leader in the fight against anti-Semitism. He is the founder. It's our 15th anniversary of the Brandeis Center. 15 years ago, Ken Marcus founded the Brandeis Center with 2 people, and today there's over 50 employees, 3 offices, and going very, very strong. So it's really incredible, the work that Ken and the vision that he had. The New York Times actually has called him the man who helped redefine campus anti-Semitism. And he is described as the single most effective and respected force to combat anti-Semitism. Before the Brandeis Center, and actually taking a break here and there, Ken had a great career as the Assistant U.S. Secretary of Education for Civil Rights. And he was staff director at the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights and General Deputy Assistant U.S. Secretary Housing and Urban Development for Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity. So as you can see, Ken will know what he's talking about today, and he will be a pleasure to listen to. I also, everyone has the booklets of the law review article that was written by Ken on the IHRA definition. Please take them with you. They're incredible. It's a credible resource for you. And if you need more copies or anything, please contact us. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Ken.
Thank you, Karen. Good to see all of you. This is our first briefing under the tenure of our new Chief Policy Officer, Karen Pakin-Baral. So we're thrilled at what an event this is today. Many are focused on Iran. I actually think that it's very appropriate to have this event at a time when our minds are on Iran. To me, a turning point in Jewish American history was with the Durban, South Africa conference on racism that turned into something of an anti-Jewish hate festival. 25 or so years ago, especially on the non-governmental organization side, we should remember that that conference was planned in Tehran during the Iranian pre-conference, which became a pivotal turning point, prior to which I would say we saw half a century of progress in fighting anti-Semitism. But with that conference, we saw the beginning of a turnaround, coincidental with both the onset of the Second Intifada and also 9/11. 9/11, when we saw that what happens abroad is also brought home here. 9/11, when we saw not just an attack on America that was absolutely horrifying to live through, but also an extraordinary spike in anti-Semitism, which we all really know about well from having read Deborah Lipstadt's work. One of her recent books details the rise of anti-Jewish conspiracy thinking in connection 25 years ago with 9/11, when Jews were blamed, as we are for so many things, and as we have been within just the last 24 hours by those who oppose our intervention in Iran and therefore assume that it must be the work of Jews behind it. So then as now, we are facing both an external enemy in Iran and also anti-Semitism domestically. At the Louis D. Brandeis Center, we have been for 15 years fighting anti-Semitism on college campuses, but more recently, as that hate has spread to K-12 schools, to the health arena, to the workplace, to labor unions, to public accommodations, and to the street, we have had to fight it there as well, mostly with litigation, with administrative and regulatory work, but also now increasingly with public policy as well. While we have many tools in our arsenal, there is none that is stronger than the so-called IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism. It is the gold standard in definitions. Senator Langford mentioned that there are some folks who have other definitions. What I have found is that if you speak to academics, they all, maybe Professor Martin in a good way is an exception, but they all think they can do better. And I have to confess that I once thought I could do better. There are many, many definitions, but there's only one gold, and I published mine, I'm not all that proud to say it, but there's only one definition that has been embraced by dozens of countries around the world, and by now a supermajority of U.S. states, only one definition that is generally agreed upon, and which is a part of the regulatory governance of the United States. That's the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism. It has been embraced by administrations of both parties in the United States, and it has been used for over 2 decades. The Anti-Semitism Awareness Act is perhaps the most important federal response, building upon the executive order on combating anti-Semitism. In a moment, we will turn to the panel and I will make some introductions, but let's pause for just a moment now.
Hi, I'm back up to introduce Representative Gillen, the Congresswoman. Gillen is serving her first term in Congress and representing the people of New York's 4th Congressional District on Long Island, and I think you might have 1 or 2 constituents in the room. Congresswoman Gillen has been a great friend to the Jewish community. She reintroduced the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act and also announced a policy plan to combat anti-Semitism, and she's advocated for stronger enforcement of civil rights to protect Jewish students on campus, and we're really delighted to have you here. Thank you for taking the time in a very busy day.
Hello. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to be here. I'm so proud to be a representative for the 4th Congressional District, which has, I think, one of the largest Jewish constituencies in any congressional district in the United States. I want to thank Ken Marcus and the Brandeis Center, as well as the other partner organizations, for putting together this important briefing today. I'm glad also to be speaking alongside Senator Langford, and I'm proud to work with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle as a member of the bipartisan task force for combating anti-Semitism. I'm also honored to be here with the ambassador, Deborah Lipstadt, an extraordinary leader and a champion in the fight against anti-Semitism. So nearly 10 years ago, more than 30 countries in the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance adopted a working definition of anti-Semitism, which is the most widely recognized tool for countering this type of hate. The IHRA definition illustrates the different manifestations of anti-Semitism, including how extreme anti-Israel rhetoric can be and often is anti-Semitic. We saw this with the shocking and unacceptable scenes that happened at Columbia University and at other college campuses in the aftermath of October 7th. Students from my district on Long Island were targeted simply for being Jewish. I had a mother come and approach me and said her daughter was afraid to wear her Star of David on campus because she thought she might be attacked or harassed. This is unacceptable and un-American. That's why I'm proud to have helped introduce the Bipartisan Anti-Semitism Awareness Act in the House with my colleagues, Representatives Mike Lawler and Josh Gottheimer. Again, our support for Israel and our support on the battle against anti-Semitism should always be a bipartisan issue. So this bill will require the Department of Education to consider the IHRA definition when investigating anti-Semitism on campuses. This, again, is bipartisan. It's a common sense effort that does not prevent free speech. It just helps protect Jewish students. This is a major priority for the communities in my district, and I am committed to getting it across the finish line. So thank you for inviting me today. I'll continue to stand with you all in the fight against anti-Semitism and representing the many people in my district. So thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. So let me now join the panel here. I'm so happy that we have such a fantastic panel. Let me say a few words about each of the panelists, and then I'll have some questions. Ambassador Deborah Lipstadt is simultaneously one of the leading scholars of anti-Semitism in the world, and that might even be an understatement. In addition, one of the leaders.
Depends if you believe in aliens, if there's a universe.
Okay. Let's maybe go further. And in addition, a former government official who was extremely active and effective in fighting anti-Semitism practically, a long-time Emory professor. Her books have made major contributions, most famously, perhaps, with respect to Holocaust denial, for which she really provided the eye-opening contributions, but also in a wide range of other areas as well. Sandra Parker is one of the most effective government advocacy people that I know, and certainly one of the greatest friends of the Jewish community. She's a practicing lawyer, but best known, I think, as chairwoman of the board of Christians United for Israel Action Fund. Her father, Pastor Hagee, and their organizations have been both famously influential in a public way, but also I would say behind the scenes, even more so, as among our strongest friends in the world. And so it's really an honor to have her as well. Andrea Martin is assistant professor of law at Penn State Dickinson Law. If this is your first time hearing from Professor Martin, remember this day. It won't be the last. She is both a scholar of contemporary anti-Semitism and legal efforts to address it, but also, I would say, a kind of an institution builder. She is one of the leading forces in creating a movement of law and anti-Semitism studies in America, an intellectual movement that I think has been sorely needed for many years. Together with Professor Rona Kitchen-Kaufman, she has really been influential at creating a field. So we have really now, I would say, a wonderful combination of different perspectives on this issue. Ambassador Lipstadt, we've heard today that IHRA has the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's international working definition of anti-Semitism has had bipartisan support. And I think sometimes people say that because there's some question or doubt. And I have to say, it was just 2 weeks ago at a hearing of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights that one commissioner put into question whether the Biden administration had supported the working definition. Given that you were special envoy to combat anti-Semitism during the Biden administration, I wonder if you would maybe speak a little bit about IHRA and set the record straight.
Yes, first of all, that's completely wrong. Within a few days of coming into office, Secretary of State Blinken, to whom I directly reported, enthusiastically embraced the IHRA definition. Much of the opposition to the IHRA definition began in 2019 when then President Trump, in his first term, included an executive order. There was an expectation among some people, or just anticipation, that President Biden would revoke that executive order. He did not. And in fact, in the global guidelines, which I can talk about later, which we put together, guidelines for fighting anti-Semitism, sort of best practices, as we saw it at the State Department, which we issued not as a State Department document, but as a multilateral document signed by now 40 nations and for a multilateral organization, including the EU, the OAS, et cetera. The IHRA definition is recommended as the guide to this. So no, it has been embraced on both sides of the aisle. And in fact, speaking again about bipartisanship, which is a word we don't hear very much around here unless it's being decried, the global guidelines have been fully adopted by Secretary Rubio and by the second Trump administration. So this is something that was not controversial until it was made controversial.
Thank you. And Sandra Parker, IHRA is often discussed within the Jewish community, and we discuss why it is important in fighting anti-Semitism. As the head of the Christians United for Israel Action Committee, you have a different perspective on this. Some say that there have been among the strongest advocates Christian leaders, but there have very recently been some loud voices questioning all of this. You're certainly the expert on this topic. Could you explain?
Certainly. First of all, Ken, I have never heard of a definition simultaneously referred to as the gold standard, and it also quite literally being the lowest bar that there is. The bar is on the ground and people are tripping over it. We're saying IHRA, 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 and we need to not forget that the IHRA definition at its core is a sentence, a certain perception of Jews that may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. So if you have a problem with that definition, then I assure you, you are the problem. So I just want everybody here to remember that. I also am not a Jew. Darn. It was a sad day for me when I learned that wasn't the case, but I am not.
We're open.
We're open. And so for those of you that are in offices that may hear from constituents, and you're not having conversations with panelists like on the right and my left who are smarter than me on accident than I could ever be on purpose. You have to remember that the IHRA definition protects all students. We keep saying it protects Jewish students, it protects Jewish students. It does, it protects Jewish students. But a decade ago, when I was testifying before Chairman Goodlatte, then on college campus anti-Semitism, the panel was filled with experts, and then there was me. And I was there not to talk about studies, not to talk about statistics. I was there to talk about the Christian students that had had rocks thrown at them, the Christian students that had been spit upon, the Christian students that had been shouted down, the Christian students that had been subject of unlawful harassment on campus, because merely standing with or looking like you are supporting Jews or the Jewish state subjects you to the same type of vitriol. They did not have a 23andMe prior to their being unlawfully harassed. So IHRA it's the gold standard and the lowest bar. It protects all students, not just Jewish students. And then from some people, including lawmakers, you may hear, including podcasters, who claim Christianity to be used as a fig leaf for their hatred. But if you have a problem with Jewish people, then you are as Christian as a hog is kosher. But they will say, kind of referring to an example within the examples in the IHRA definition, that the IHRA definition goes against Christian scripture, criminalizes Christianity, and they will use that as a shield to protect them from having to support IHRA, but also a sword to be anti-Semitic in the refusal to do so. I'm a big Bible thumper. I'm a big Christian. If it's in the Bible, I believe it. And I'm not asking you to get into a theological debate with anybody, but I am here as a Christian to remind all people that nowhere in Christianity does it demand that you blame Jews for the death of Christ in order to be a Christian. But there is only one thing in Christianity that makes you a Christian, and that's the belief in the sacrificial and the substitutionary death of Jesus Christ. That's the belief that nobody could have murdered Christ, Roman, Jew, or what have you, because the Bible specifically says in John 10:18, Jesus Christ quoted, "No man can take my life from me. I lay it down willingly." So while one can be biblically ignorant and be a Christian, one cannot try to hold another people group responsible for the murder of Christ and still be a Christian. So if somebody is using that as their excuse to not stand with IHRA, they are showing you that they are biblically illiterate, which bless their heart, and then they are also saying that they're not a Christian.
Wow.
Professor Martin, as a practitioner in government, I saw for several years that the absence of an official definition of anti-Semitism left the federal government, and especially the Education Department's Office for Civil Rights, largely floundering for several years without finding anti-Semitism at any college or university. As a scholar, could you speak from your perspective about the importance of IHRA as it relates to civil rights law?
Absolutely. It is vital that we have a clear definition for anti-Semitism. Why? Why do we need a definition? I get asked that all the time. Definitions are really important in the law. I teach my law students, as first-year law students, how to write a rule, which is essentially a definition. If any of you went to law school, you remember rule synthesis. Judges need definitions for clarity. Why do we need it with anti-Semitism specifically? Because anti-Semitism is often misclassified, it's misidentified, and it's misunderstood. First, it's misclassified because it operates on multiple axes, right? There are multiple protected classes implicated when it comes to anti-Semitism. It could be national origin, it could be religious, it could be ethnicity. And so it's very easily misclassified. It's also misidentified. Why? because it's known as the world's oldest hatred. And like anything that's been around since ancient times, it's evolved. It started as religious hatred, it moved to racial hatred, it then transformed into an ethno-religious bigotry, and now what we're seeing today is hostility toward Jews that is based on Zionism. And so anti-Semitism can be difficult to identify because it changes. And then finally, it is very easily misunderstood. Civil rights statutes presuppose that the adjudicators understand how to implement the law, but they don't without clear rules and definitions. And so what anti-Semitism does, by having a definition of anti-Semitism, it provides judges with clarity. If they are not given that clarity, what we see is hesitant enforcement of Title VI. We see a lack of protection for people who are harassed based on their ethnicity or ancestry-based harassment. And so we need that definition for clarity and for consistent rulings.
Thank you. Ambassador, we've heard from Sandra Parker about the compelling nature of the sort of prefatory language or black box definition, but we've also heard about the examples, including from Senator Langford. Could you speak to the examples as a historian and why they're important?
I think, first of all, I want to thank my two panelists. I've been furiously taking notes because I'm writing a book on my experience. So I already have things I'm going to include that you both said. But first of all, a little history. I'm a historian, as you well know. Why was there a need for a definition? Because after Durban, it was there before. Don't kid yourself, it only starts after Durban, but it's there before, but it tsunamied after Durban. A rash of what some people call the new anti-Semitism. Those of us who are in the business of studying it called it a not-so-new anti-Semitism, but one connected directly to the state of Israel. And so data collectors, police officers, judges, as Professor Martin was talking about so clearly just a moment ago, needed some sort of guidance. How do you do this? What are we seeing? Are we seeing just hooliganism and disturbance, or is it a hate crime? And it was actually an EU council that pushed for some form of definition. It brought together groups of historians, policymakers, NGO leaders, and they came up with this definition, which you just read. But then came the examples, sort of to, because the data, the police officer on the beat, the judge, needed something concrete. And the examples, most of the examples relate to Israel because that was the kind of anti-Semitism that was being seen on the street that was hard to sort of understand when is and when isn't it anti-Semitism. But here's, rather than focusing on the examples, Ken, those examples are introduced by a crucial 2 sentences, which is so often ignored and twisted by the critics. First of all, it says, and I'm paraphrasing here, I'm sure the people who can get it exactly, you probably have it in your notes, criticism of Israel similar to that leveled at any other country is not necessarily anti-Semitism. And that's absolutely correct. Think about it. Every Saturday night, certainly before October 7th, and there were massive demonstrations in Israel on the streets about people who felt that Prime Minister Netanyahu's judicial reform was a threat to Israel's stellar judicial system. They were very critical, hostile. Couldn't call them anti-Semites. They were doing what we do in democracies, expressing their view. Those of you who've been to Israel, who know Israel well, know that the national sport in Israel is criticism of the government. Not football comes next. And it depends what government is in power. If it's a right-wing government, you sit in a cafe in Tel Aviv, you hear criticism. If it's a left-wing government, you go to a cafe in Jerusalem and you'll hear criticism. So criticism is not. Now, sometimes criticism can be. If you do criticism that says, well, this is how Jews are, that's why they're doing this. or you have all sorts, some of which we've heard in the last 24 hours, anti-Semitic innuendo in it, then it does cross the line. And then but that's not the only caveat. There are actually three caveats. The second sentence, and again, I'm paraphrasing, the following examples can or cannot constitute or could constitute anti-Semitism, could. Doesn't say constitute, could. That word, it's a short thing, so every word there has been fought over vociferously and vigorously. And then the third caveat, depending on context. So anybody who says that that the IHRA definition makes criticism of Israel illegal hasn't read it. Anybody who says these examples are absolutes hasn't read it. I had an example. I'll finish with this anecdote. I was in South Africa, in Cape Town at the university, speaking about the IHRA definition, and a graduate student, because someone identified him for me afterwards, raised his hand and says, well, the IHRA definition makes criticism. I said, could you tell me which part of the definition you're referring to directly? And he frou-froued, and he said, no, but it does, and he kept insisting on it. I said, methinks you haven't read it recently. I was being kind, you know? And what I didn't say is that if he had been my student and come with a complaint about a document that he hadn't read, in its original, I would have thrown him out and said, go do better research. But that's, to some degree, that train has left the station because that is out there. But look at it, look at the caveats. The caveats are crucial because it leaves it in the hands of the judges. It doesn't say to a judge, it says depends on context. Well, someone has to determine context. Can or cannot. You have to, policies of Israel, criticism is not necessarily. Well, figure out when it is and when it isn't. They're guidelines.
Thank you. Sandra Parker, we have some congressional staff in the room. They look at a lot of different bills. They're aware that there have been resolutions passed dealing with anti-Semitism and bills that have been passed over the years. Why is it that the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act has been so important that you have put such energy behind supporting it over the years?
Sure. Well, like I said, it protects all students, not just Jewish students. But at its core, and as the professor suggested, you can't defeat what you're unwilling to define. And so the unwillingness to adopt the elephant in the room, it's 37 states that have done so on the heels of President Trump's EO and his first administration and the failure of the government to make that the federal law of the land. 37 states think that this issue is important enough that they have either codified it or recognized it in some way. And the other thing that people need to remember, in addition to the fact that this protects everybody, is, people, it shows free speech, it shows free speech, it shows free speech, and then the anti-cancel culture and all of that stuff. People love to fight you with just a slogan, like a bumper sticker, it shows free speech. First Amendment, chills free speech. And so in response to that, I always say, the IHRA definition, no more chills free speech than the presence of a thermometer changes the temperature in the room. It is a gauge. It is a unit of measurement. It is there for you to have not a stick to beat people over the head with when they say something you don't like. It is a yardstick. It is a measure to say some type of unlawful action has occurred. Was this action motivated by anti-Semitism or not? Maybe those two people just hate each other. Soy mexicana, mi madre es mexicana, Diana Castro, okay? If somebody were to slap me in the face and say nothing, you guys would have a lot of questions. If somebody were to slap me in the face and say, go back to Mexico, you guys would have less questions. Would anybody say, she got slapped in the face and then the woman who did it said, go back to Mexico, but ignore what they said? Nobody would say that. If you've seen one episode of Matlock, you know the Miranda rules. What you say can and will be held against you. So this is not saying that you can't say what you want. This is saying that here is something to consider. If what these people have said is evidentiary, shows proof that there was anti-Semitic intent, maybe there wasn't. maybe just a run-of-the-mill unlawful harassment has taken place. It will be dealt with by the judges, by the school administrators, by the authorities. There should be no reason. If I were an educator, I would say, I call Ken the godfather of IHRA. I like that title the best. If I were an educator, I would say, thank you. Thank you for giving me a guideline, because this is a Herculean task and happens at such an increasing rate. I don't know what it is. And we can't rely on, I forget the Supreme Court justice who said it, you'll know it when you see it.
Potter Stewart.
There you go. As a historian, you need a standard that protects everyone.
I just want to add something to that. There is one form of, or one kind of speech that IHRA does shut down, and we have to acknowledge that. It shuts down those who would claim any criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
And we know some people like that, who the minute they hear criticism, it says criticism of Israel cannot necessarily, does not necessarily constitute anti-Semitism. So, in the sense, it's really kind of ironic in that way. But my question more is, if you follow, again, as a historian, where this tsunami of criticism came from. And I argue that it's part of an effort to make certain pillars of Jewish life, pillars with small p, sort of institutions of Jewish life, toxic. And remember, IHRA was signed by Sweden. They accepted the definition, the examples, without any problem. I was talking to my former counterpart, she's still there, at the EU, Katarina von Schnurbein, and we were talking about it. Sweden signed it. They didn't have any problem with it until it was made toxic.
Yeah.
So.
The presence of IHRA promotes free speech more than its absence protects it. Because if everything is anti-Semitism, then nothing is anti-Semitism.
Professor Martin, we have a constitutional law professor in the room, so there's been talk about the First Amendment as it applies to
Oh, my
IHRA.
goodness.
What is your view on that?
Okay, so when you were speaking, I just completely agree, and I love your analogy. She used the word measure, right? And so it made me think of a measuring tape, because I'm like one of these do-it-yourselfers, and I do things, and one time I had a brilliant idea to put up crown molding in my house, and I had a saw, but I later found out you need a miter saw for accurate angular cuts, and so my entire project failed. And so while everyone calls IHRA the gold standard, I literally call it the right tool. So when you said measure, right, it's just a measurement. This does not, I just think the First Amendment thing, Ken, is literally, it's raised whenever there's a Jewish issue in some ways, because it's not problematic when it comes to the IHRA definition. We know that IHRA is the right tool to define anti-Semitism. How do we know that? It's been proven. Once civil rights agencies were told to use the IHRA definition, and they started viewing claims of alleged anti-Semitism through the IHRA lens, guess what we got? Clarity. They understood how anti-Zionist conduct could be used as a proxy for discrimination, marginalization, harassment of Jewish students. So we know that this is a proven tool. We also know, and we heard about it a little bit today, that the lovely thing about this definition is that it can be supported by both Democrats and Republicans. So from its earliest iteration, it was accepted by George W. Bush, and then we saw it being utilized in some form by the administrations of Obama, Biden, and Trump. So we've got a tool that works, we have a proven tool, we have a tool that can cross partisan lines, right? Both sides of the fence. And this tool has also stood the test of time. Even though we're sitting here talking about it in 2026, this definition was created over 2 decades ago. And it is amazing because it perfectly describes the type of anti-Semitism we're seeing today and more acutely after October 7th. It's like, whoa, the group that put this together, and this is not a small committee, this wasn't a political coalition that put this together. This was a group of dozens of governments, of civil society organizations, of human rights institutes that put this together. So when I say this is the perfect tool, a great tool, I say that because it's proven that it works, and it has stood the test of time. It is the best way to define anti-Semitism that we have today.
Thank you. So I've got some questions for all of you, but I do want first to give the ambassador an opportunity to expand a little bit on something she said. We've talked mostly in the domestic context. You've mentioned Sweden, but there are many countries that have weighed in on this.
Dozens.
You also mentioned the guidelines, right, which I think was very important work that you did. Not nearly enough discussed. I think when you mentioned the guidelines, Bars knew what you meant, Dan and Karen, and everyone else we're all just pretending. So tell us about the guidelines and why they're important and what they reflect about the international community.
On Christmas Day, December 23rd, where, for most Jews it's a very lonely day because everything is closed, and I was sitting with a friend. We went to have tea in one of the hotels, and I said, I have a year left in office, so a little more than a year. And because I knew I was going back to Emory to teach after approximately 3 years in office, whether there was a Biden 2 or Harris 1 or whatever, I was leaving. I said, I want to leave behind something more than just I went to 42 countries, which I did do, because that's ephemeral, it goes away. You have your passport to prove it or something. So I began to talk with her about what could it be, and she said, well, convention. I first thought when she said convention, she meant conference, and I said, I don't want. No, she said, some sort of what the lawyers here would call soft law. And I began to think about it and to toy with it, and then about a week later, I'm in my office, and the Attorney General I get to see on my list of appointments for the day. It's early January, that the Attorney General or Minister of Justice of Australia is coming to see me. So I said to my OMS, Office Management Specialist, my assistant, as it's called in the State Department lingo, shouldn't he be going to see Merrick Garland at DOJ? He said, yes, he's coming from there to see you. We had no idea what it was about. He walked in, he said, we have a problem with anti-Semitism. We'd like your advice what to do about it. Australia had seen on October 8th, before Bondi Beach or any of the more recent horrors, a demonstration at the Opera House where pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian, pro-Gaza, whatever you want to call them, demonstrators chanted Jews to the gas, and some say they didn't chant that. What they say is, where are the Jews? To some degree, I find that more frightening, because Jews to the gas is horrific, but where are the Jews? We're looking for you, And when the Jews who wanted to come demonstrate made it known to the police they were planning to counter-demonstrate, the police said to them, don't come, stay home, we can't protect you. A failure of democratic system par excellence. So I began to talk to him what I thought a government could do. First things, leaders must speak out unequivocally, without hesitation. This is wrong, full stop, no comma, semicolon, or any other form of punctuation except full stop. And then don't politicize it. Both sides of the aisle, this is too important to politicize. Rely on the IHRA definition. We didn't use the word adopt because, rely. This is a good tool, rely. And we went on, we made it short. I said, let's make it short. First, we was going to have 10 paragraphs, and so one of my colleagues said, one of my team members said 10 commandments. And then it grew to 12, and he was very disappointed until someone said, no, 12 tribes. So it's short, and we could have issued it at the State Department as this is our experience of best practices. But we wanted it to be more than that. And we began to, so to speak, shop it. We worked with our the representative of the EU, Katharina von Schnurbein, the German envoy, about 4 or 5 of the major American allies, envoys, to work the language. We worked with our legal department in the State Department. Nothing happens without legal signing off on it. We brought them in at the very beginning. They were the ones, in fact, who said 12 tribes. And then we began to get signatories. And within a few months, we had well over 30 now, there are 40 countries that have signed on. And the rush was because we wanted to issue it in Buenos Aires. This has resonance for today. In Buenos Aires, where we were gathering, many people were gathering in July 25 to mark the 24, I'm sorry, to mark the 30th anniversary of the bombing of the AMIA building, which was the Argentinian JCC, Jewish Community Center, which was the biggest death toll of Jews since the Holocaust up until October 7th. And that was done by Hezbollah with the financial and technical support of Iran. And they had done the same thing 2 years earlier, blowing up the Israeli embassy. And in fact, they blew it up early in the morning, so most of the people killed were girls from a Catholic school next door. But we did this as best practices. It has been embraced by, as I said earlier, by Secretary Rubio. And much of what we did was done in the Biden has not been embraced by this administration, but this was fully embraced. And if you just go do global guidelines to counter anti-Semitism. And now at Emory, in fact, I'm setting up a group with students and professionals to monitor compliance, because it's one thing to sign on, it's another thing to comply.
That's great. I look forward to seeing that, and if we can work with you on that, that's wonderful.
That'd be terrific.
We'll be
Got a deal.
keeping an eye on that. So let me start, last question before I turn to you for any questions you might have. Starting with Andrea Martin and then coming back. A question about the future, either what most concerns you about the future of anti-Semitism, or else what gives you hope that we can meet the challenge.
Okay, well, I am a professor of law, and I believe in academics, and I believe in scholarship, and I believe in the truth, and I believe in research, right? So my research since October 7th has been very much focused on what's happening on college campuses. So the thing that's upsetting me the most, and I had 2 boys in college on October 7th, and one at NYU and one at Penn State, and one faced horrific anti-Semitism. And I literally am so upset that an environment that's supposed to be about learning and debate and equal opportunity and diversity and learning from others has turned into what it's turned into. But I have hope, because I believe that we can turn it around. I believe that universities and other institutions should adopt the IHRA definition, because it can actually help educate and inform, help people understand what anti-Semitism is. I don't believe that the world is bad. I think people are misinformed, uneducated, and our job is to educate them and make colleges again a place where discourse can happen, and that students can learn from each other, and that they can once again thrive as places for diversity and education. So it's sort of my negative that I have, but also I do have hope for the future.
Similarly, I'm very hopeful because I think that resistance in most cases is good. If you were useless or if you were not effective, I assure you nobody would resist you. Without the resistance of water, a boat would sink. Without the resistance of air, a plane would crash. and a rubber band is useless to all of us unless and until it's stretched. So I think that the reason why there is such an effort, and it is an effort, it is not organic activism, it is paid anarchy, why there is such an effort to undermine what you describe as the pillars, is because that is the foundation of the United States of America, of the Judeo-Christian values that are the building block of our nation, which is the world's last great hope. And people are saying this is a bipartisan issue, but I will do you one better. It's a nonpartisan issue. It's not a partisan issue at all. It is not a Jewish issue at all. It is a human issue. So I have hope because I know that America remains on the right side of history at large. There is no poll that says the majority of Americans are against the Jewish people or against Israel. It's quite the opposite. America is philo-Semitic. The future is philo-Semitic. We have 10 million members at CUFI as anecdotal evidence of proof of that. And so that is why I am hopeful, and simultaneously, that is why I know that the work that we're all doing is effective. The only thing that I am concerned about, I'll give it air quotes because as a person of faith, I know I'm standing on the right side of history, is if we were to have somebody in the White House that is not as stalwart in their willingness to confront anti-Semitism as the last two administrations have been. And we have seen people get awfully close to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue who are not. And that is my concern.
What concerns me, first of all, know that the threat of anti-Semitism, I talk about the multi-tiered threat, is not just the threat against Jews, Jewish institutions, and those associated with them. And I always add that phrase. Someone in this room may remember, I'm sure Karen does, a decade ago, the attack on the JCC in Kansas City. 3 people were killed, none of them were Jews. One was a woman who has worked at the JCC for 20 years, a grandfather bringing his child to play practice, his grandchild to practice in a play, et cetera. So that's the basic line. And if anti-Semitism were only that, it would be a valid thing or solely that for a government to fight. But it's a threat to democracy and rule of law. And I don't say that glibly. If you buy into the conspiracy theory, which is the bedrock, the foundation stone of anti-Semitism, and you believe the Jews control governments, judges, votes, whatever, you've given up on democracy. And the flip side of it is what happened to a lot of students on a lot of campuses, probably even maybe your children experienced it when you made reference to that certainly after October 7th and even before that, where they found an administration that didn't care. UCLA, the students, called the encampment people, blocked the students' access to the library, and the university did nothing. Court took them to task for it, but they felt, and at Columbia, the students said, we had a complaint, there was no one to go to. So this is a threat to democracy. It's a threat to national security and stability. After October 7th, we saw a surge in anti-Semitism on Chinese-controlled websites. What connection do the Chinese, the rabbis asked, what is Shemitah doing next to Har Sinai? What is the laws on sabbatical law doing next to Mount Sinai? What is China and anti-Semitism? They were virtue signaling to the global south, or what we used to call the third world countries. We're with you, they're with them. Anti-Semitism as the utilitarian. So this is a threat to all of us. The normalization of anti-Semitism. I know of grandparents who want to give, and parents who want to give, but certainly grandparents who wanted to give their children a Magen David for Hanukkah or for their bar and bat mitzvah. They asked the parents if it was okay. I know people who this is hanging out, somehow it's under my shirt, who say to me, aren't you concerned about wearing that? Or should I wear it? I know no one who wears a cross who has to think twice about wearing a cross. Except maybe is my behavior going to be a validation of my beliefs? If I'm going bad, I put it. But no one has to be afraid for their safety. There is no Jewish institution in the world, certainly in the United States, that doesn't have security and multi-levels of security. Synagogue leadership, rabbis and lay leaders are crying that this is now their biggest expenditure.
Right.
This is not normal. And it should not be accepted. And if you think it only impacts Jews, think again. So that's what worries me. What gives me hope? I'll end with a little story. I love anecdotes, but this is a true story. I was on trial for libel in the United Kingdom. Some of you may know there's a movie about it. There's a better book. I wrote the book by a Holocaust denier. And it was a major trial. And a few days before the trial, a friend of mine who's was an art historian and famous curator of Jewish museums, Grace Grossman, called me and said, "You got to go to the British Museum." I said, "I'm a little busy preparing for the trial." She said, "No, you must go." So I said, "Well, I don't think I'm going to make it, but if I go, what should I go see?" She said, "Go see the Lachish inscriptions. The Lachish inscriptions date from the rule of Sancheiriv, the Assyrians who were coming. That's when the 10 lost tribes, the 10 tribes were captured. And he had just destroyed many cities in Israel, and he had destroyed Lachish. Lachish was the second largest city in Israel at that time, and he was headed to the largest city, Jerusalem. He said, "I'm going to destroy Jerusalem." Had he destroyed Jerusalem, Jewish history would be very short. That would have been the end. And she said to me, "Where are the Assyrians? Where are the Romans? Where are the Babylonians? We're here."
You're here. So I recognize that I owe an apology to everyone here who is not named Boris, Karen, or Dan. You knew what the guidelines were. Karen says that people don't realize that I'm funny, especially if they've heard my jokes.
Works for you?
Well, this is why she's chief of policy and why I should listen to her. Questions?
When you ask a question, please state your name, when the office that you're representing, or your organization. And I encourage everybody to ask questions. It's really an opportunity to speak with some of the most brilliant minds that we have here today.
My name is Randy Cohen Koblenz. My sister EJ says hello.
Oh, okay.
And I'm with Hadassah. My question to all of you, first of all, enlightening and thank you. But my question is, you're talking about academics and students. What about people that don't go past high school? Why aren't there more civics lessons in formative years? And what can be done? How do we work on that space? And thank you.
That is a fabulous question. And we are actually seeing anti-Semitism not only in the higher education setting, but we have a really serious problem in K through 12. And we're starting to have groups, including the Brandeis Center for Human Rights, look into what's happening in high schools and what's happening even in the K through 6. Interestingly, I'm a law professor now, but while my kids were young, I actually went to teach the Holocaust in high schools in the state of Pennsylvania. And I would shift from school to school, and I was trying to teach people, what's happening. But what I'm hearing from educators, many of whom are my good friends, is that anti-Semitism is really beginning to be ingrained in the curriculum. And we're having a problem. My latest piece that I'm writing now is about anti-Semitism in teachers' unions. Mm-hmm. And we're starting to see that this started in higher education and in academia. This is where the problem started, with Palestinian Studies Department sort of bringing this settler colonial narrative, and it just filtered down, yes, into the lower grades. And we have to work on that through legal scholarship, through lawsuits. But the concern you are raising is exactly my concern.
One of the things that we're working on at Christians United for Israel is state-level mandated Holocaust education, which we do through not like a separate subject, but typically English. That's your opportunity. And then, of course, history or civics. Every several years, you'll have the scholars come together and review standards and whatever. So it's really important that when they do that, that they have a partner to go to make sure that the books that they're reading and the standards are reliable ones. Secondly, and we did this past legislative section in Texas, even though 37 states have IHRA, it's really important that it's that the law is actually where it belongs. And I would argue that that's in the education code. Sometimes they're in government codes or, proclamations, like executive orders. So IHRA's been in the state of Texas for over a decade. And also, Christianity in the state of Texas is still thriving, I assure you. So for people to say that it outlaws Christianity, again, not true. And we did a law in Texas. Ken, you remember I called you and spoke to you about it and said we have an opportunity in the state of Texas to make this apply to every single school in the state of Texas, K through college. And so we did that. And it was seamless. It was as IHRA was intended, as the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act was drafted. In the state of Texas, and I'm sure probably all other states have similar laws that says if you get money from the state, you also have to have a code of conduct. And the code of conduct needs to protect your students. I mean, as a base, that's what it is. So it was really great because that leaves it up to the educators and the people that are in charge to decide what their codes of conduct are and what's acceptable on their college campuses. So the law that we wrote says, and if there has been a violation of the code of conduct, and there's reason to believe that that violation was motivated by anti-Semitism, then you must adopt the definition of IHRA and its examples. And so it was a really just elegant, again, seamless way to make sure that the educators had that tool. There is a big gap between the educator in 8th grade civics and the Office of Civil Rights in Washington, D.C. A huge gap. And that's where most of this stuff is happening. And Ken accurately saw it in a post-9/11 world where like, ooh, Jews, Muslims, Sikhs, they're in a bad way. They need some help. Something's happening. And so he, started his invaluable work. So we know anti-Semitism is happening. And without IHRA, it's either you assume these two things. It's either being ignored or people don't know what it is. So let's appeal to people's better angels and say, surely they're not wholesale ignoring it. They just don't know what it is. And so getting IHRA at the state level in all of the schools, again, at least creates the standard. So when the problem arises, they're, not listless and they have something to hold on to.
I would add a third element, because my colleagues on the panel have spoken very eloquently about education and about law. I want a third element, and that's why the global guidelines. We said leaders have to speak out expeditiously and unequivocally. It's not just leaders. When you to borrow that phrase from the TSA, when you hear something, say something. We have to make anti-Semitism uncool. Another anecdote, I had many interns in my office during my time there, and they would be assigned to us by the internship office at the State Department. And one of them was a young man named Gerardo, and his family was from South America. His parents had come as undocumented, gotten their citizenship, and he and his brother was the first ones in their family ever to go to university. I think he went to George Mason. And he came to me, finished his tenure as an intern. He came to me into my office for his exit interview, and he told me the following story. He said when he was appointed to this office, he thought, I'm Hispanic, South American. What am I doing in an office on anti-Semitism? I'm Jewish, I'm Catholic, etc. He said, and on top of that, I said, well, I don't really know about it, care about it that much. And on top of that, there are probably lots of interns, Jewish interns, who would kill to be here to work with you, he said to me. So he said, but last night I was sitting with a friend in my dorm room and we were playing video games and the guy made some anti-Semitic statement. He said, and I turned to him and said, hey, dude, you can't say that. That's hate. That's anti-Semitism. I said, my work is done. We have to make it uncool and unacceptable. And you have to be willing to speak out. And I've had students come into my office who have had problems with suite mates and things like that. And I say, you have to speak out. And I said, well, I'm concerned because if I speak out, they won't be my friends. I said, do you want them as friends? So what we've made smoking uncool. It took a while. It used to be, do you mind if I smoke? Oh, of course, no problem. Then they stopped asking. You went outside to smoke. And now we look at anybody who smokes as, maybe some of you are smokers, I don't know, but something. And even if you smoke, you feel it's wrong. We got to do the same thing with anti-Semitism. I know many people who I don't know many people, but I'm sure there are many people who would feel very comfortable using the N-word. But we don't use it because we know it's wrong, and we know it hurts people, and we know it's demeaning and degrading. So while I would love you not to be anti-Semitic because you recognize in your heart how horrific it is, At the very least, I want you to think it's uncool and unacceptable.
Karen, do we have time for?
Let's take one more question, and then we'll close up.
Hi, I'm Zoe. I'm with Tom Kane's office, and we are already a co-sponsor to the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, but I do know in the New Jersey legislature as of January 13th that it did fail the IHRA definition of this year, which is pretty disappointing to us as my boss is very strong on the importance of anti-Semitism and the IHRA definition. However, I think a lot of the concern from constituents just on the other end was about being a critic of Israel versus being anti-Semitic and what that means. Because while I see being anti-Israel is inherently anti-Semitic, that might not be the general consensus. And how do you counter that? And what are the main arguments against that?
Well, I think first of all, being critical. I don't know if you were here, Zoe, when I mentioned this at the beginning, but in the IHRA definition, there's a caveat: criticism of Israel such as leveled at any other country is not anti-Semitic. If you question Israel's right to exist, and I get really annoyed when politicians, I know I'm back in the political world. So I believe in Israel's right to exist. Hello, have you said I believe in Canada's right to live? I believe in Pakistan, which was created around the same time. But in any case, that's when I think you cross the line. Because then you're talking about the fate of half the world's Jewish population. And if you can be glib about that and not care, may not be anti-Semitic in intent, but it's certainly anti-Semitic in impact. So, but the IHRA definition does not, just when people say that, say to them, read it and have a little copy in your hand ready to show them that that's the saga, that's the mantra that the critics have imposed upon people, and many people will passionately fighting it without having read it.
So I'm going to take a prerogative of having the last word on that question, and then I think Leah will wrap us up. We're going to win in New Jersey. We're going to win everywhere. We've lost before. The Brandeis Center drafted, I think, the first state IHRA bill. It was in Virginia a number of years ago. It was unsuccessful. We worked on the second one. That was in Tennessee. It was unsuccessful. Then we're in South Carolina. That was the first success, and we thank Christians United for Israel, American Jewish Committee, and some other groups for helping us make that successful. We've now got 2/3 of the states have passed the state IHRA bills, and many more are working on it. Just within the last month, the Rhode Island House introduced it, Missouri House passed it, Wisconsin House passed it, the Ohio Senate was voting and I think passed it yesterday. Arizona House has passed it. So we've already got 2/3 of the states. I didn't think that was going to happen. And Virginia, where it hadn't passed, has now passed it. Tennessee, where it hadn't passed, has now passed it. So we are going to win. It's not going to be instantaneous. We're not going to win every battle, but we are going to win the war. And the most important part right now of this battle is the federal. So we are absolutely delighted that all of you are here focusing on this, including especially those of you who have perhaps a voice and an ability to help us make sure that IHRA becomes the law of the land. And now, Leo, did you want to close us out?
Thank you, Ken. Thank you to all the amazing panelists here today. I know what you all are thinking, and yes, this is one of those we were saving the best for last situations with me. I kid. My name's Leo Myers, for those who don't know me. This is really specifically geared towards congressional staff about how to kind of follow up and engage with the Brandeis Center. I also just want to quickly thank all our partner organizations, everybody from Brandeis as well that's helped with this, really appreciate it. So if anybody from Congress wants to ever reach out to me and save my information as a point of contact, you're more than welcome. Please don't be a stranger. A couple examples of how you can engage with us include if your office is interested in thinking about introducing any pieces of legislation related to IHRA or really anything related to Jewish affairs and want to consult on us with language, ideas, etc. We are here for you as a resource. there's any kind of district or state-specific situations involved in Jewish affairs in your states or district, any nuances, want to consult with us as well. I am here as a resource. Any constituent services, casework kind of stuff as well. I've actually worked for electeds for almost 4 years, so I definitely understand a lot of the nuances, intricacies, trials and tribulations you guys are going through. So yeah, don't be a stranger, even if you want to just chit-chat. I am here for you all, beyond just Congress as well. So thank you all for coming. Thank you again to the panelists, Ken, Karen, Rachel, Joel, everybody else that's helped, Leslie Ann. Thank you very, very much.